Hi, I'm Derek Leto, host of From the Ground Up, a show that uncovers the not-so-secret strategies of owners of bedrock businesses. Featuring conversations with entrepreneurs who built influential companies, we're going to take a deep dive into how successful businesses are created without having to shoot for the moon or take unnecessary risk. In this show, we're going to teach you how many great companies are built from the ground up. Welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm your host, Derek Leto, and on today's show, we welcome RJ Friedlander, a super successful entrepreneur who's also now a speaker, an investor, and board member, and he's based in Barcelona. He's the founder and CEO of ReviewPro, the world leader in guest intelligence for the hotel industry. Having grown to more than 30,000 clients in a little over 7 years, ReviewPro is widely considered to be one of the world's most successful companies in the hospitality technology space, operating in more than 150 countries and working with many of the world's most recognized hotel brands to increase customer guest satisfaction and their revenues. And so, RJ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Derek. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wow, it's great to meet up with you again. We go back a long way, 20 years or more, when you were starting out.
Absolutely, and many of the things I learned and opportunities I had back 20 years ago were things that had an impact and a positive impact on ReviewPro. So it's great to circle back and be here talking with you again today.
Well, a question I have for you is, you started out working for established corporations. When I was running, International Rectifier, you started working there, and then you went on and worked for some other big established corporations. And how do you come to decide you want to start a business on your own when you got that much stability and and a decent living from big established companies?
Sure. Well, I think that for me, the entrepreneurial bug was always there. Even from a kid, and the typical things kids do to sort of figure out ways to make money, and then in university trying to always find an angle to set up something to make money. I always had an entrepreneurial spirit, I would say. What happened was, as you said, you start working for big companies. In the case of International Rectifier, then later at CMP Media, and then for 10 years at Grupo Planeta, I had the opportunity to be involved, first of all, with great companies. These were three really, really well-run, growing, innovative companies that I was very fortunate that I had roles within those companies that I was interested, I was engaged, I was challenged, and I kept learning. So what happened was, on one hand, I had this desire and this, I somehow always knew I would have my own company, but it was just a matter of finding the right moment, the right project, and just, I don't know, that element that's hard to really define is just, you just know it's the moment, right? It's you don't think about the risks, you don't think about what you're leaving behind. I just felt like that was the project. And so, I suppose I've never been skydiving, but I suppose it's a little bit like that. At some point you just stop thinking and you just jump.
Well, ReviewPro started out in a hugely competitive online travel review space. You were competing against some extremely well-financed VC-backed startups. And how did you figure out how to make money in the space where almost no one else was able to do that?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, so what we do is we don't generate reviews. What we do is we aggregate reviews from sites like TripAdvisor, Booking.com, and 175 other online travel agents and review sites. And actually, so when we started, the idea of review analytics and the concept of online reputation management, when we had the idea and we started, there actually was no one doing that. There were review sites, but there was no one offering a B2B analytics. And so what happened was, it was an interesting situation. We started thinking that we were going to have, the world was our oyster because there was nobody there. Mm-hmm. And then I was funding the company with, the money that I'd saved over the years for the first year and a half. and then very, very quickly after we launched, that's, as you said, they came piling in other competitors that were very, very well funded. And so, we raised a total of about 5 million euros. Our largest competitor raised over $40 million from one of the largest, most well-known VC firms on the planet. And I think to answer your question, the way that we competed was we had to focus on product. We had to focus on value. We had to be very, very creative in marketing and lead generation. And so, it's a scenario when you have less money, you have to be clever in how to use it and how to prioritize. So, I think the path we traveled was much more difficult, but it forced us to focus on value and product, forced us to focus on profitability, and it forced us down a path that ultimately led to our success. There were years where it wasn't clear whether we were going to make it, in a market with competitors with so much more money. But I think ultimately our success today is because of those things.
Mm-hmm. Were there ever times when you felt like you might fail?
It's funny. There were definitely moments where if I looked at the facts in front of me, it looked like there was no way out. But I never felt like we would fail. There were moments where I was more nervous, there were points in time, when we needed to fundraise, there were points in time where, you think that your runway of cash is going to be different, or a big deal is going to come in and help you out. So there were moments where, of course, there was tremendous stress and tremendous concern, but deep inside, I don't know. I always saw or felt the victory, so it's like there was this kind of two things happening at once. On one hand, if you were logical and you looked at the facts in front of you, you probably would have raised the white flag. But somehow deep inside, in my soul, I knew that we'd find a way out.
Mm-hmm. And you were always very mindful of wanting to keep control, and so you were very strategic about starting the business using your own money and raising relatively small amounts of money at very strategic times and not others, and doing that so that ultimately you could remain the leader of your business and decide which direction you wanted to take. So what was your thought process? How did you do that? You are a great role model in that regard for aspiring entrepreneurs.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. From the beginning, what I realized was I preferred to preferred to focus and try to maintain a high percentage of a lower valuation on exit than have lots of resources and go for a big, huge exit where I would have a small percentage. So, I think you and I talked about this. I think, imagine as an entrepreneur, you say, my goal is to set up a company, and what I want to do is get an exit and make $10 million, let's say. Well, two different paths to that, assuming you're successful. You could try to build a $100 million company where you raise lots of VC money, you get diluted, you lose control, but you end up with 10% of 100 million and you get your 10 million, right? That's one path. I chose and I focused on a different path. I was never, ultimately we will have built a company that's not that far off of 100 million, but it wasn't the goal. The goal was I wanted that 10 million by building a $30 million business and keeping a third of it, right? And so what happens is, I think it's really critical to have that in mind from the beginning, because it really they're two different paths, right? So I had that clear from the beginning. And as you said, the idea was that for me, control of the business was critical, because what I've seen is that very, very few companies are success in the amount of time and with the amount of money that was originally forecasted, right? It almost always takes longer. It almost always takes a little more money. So what happened was, exactly as you said, you're playing with these two levers of growth with cash I never, lots of entrepreneurs really put they put a lot of importance on high valuations, having lots of investment, having big time investors, and I just had different focus and different values. And like I said, in the end, I'm really happy with the result, because we will have gotten a result that was commensurate with someone that raised VC money early on, but we did it by maintaining control and by maintaining the influence over the business and being able to control those levers throughout the whole journey.
Well, as you were saying, you started this out of your own savings, right? And so you put in place already a company that had something to show before, and good positive results before you went and brought in your outside investors. So how did you live so frugally?
Well, what happens is, so I have this thought that when you start a company, a tech company, there's two different ways to do it. You can start it with a dream team. That's with a bunch of people that have already done it before, right? They've been down the path, they've had successes, and you build with a core team of successful people. Well, if you do that, you need a lot of money, right? Because successful people who have done it before usually aren't willing to do it for free or at really low amounts, salary. So if you build with a dream team, then what you need to do is you need to go out, you need a lot of money, and you need VCs, right? Our approach, what I always refer to it as, we made lemonade out of lemons, right? Mm-hmm. And what I mean there is we didn't have people that had done it before, right? We hired people at lower salaries, and the reason we could get them at lower salaries, this is early on. Now we pay market or above market salaries, but at the time the idea was that we would hire people at lower salaries because it actually never done the job they were hired for, right? And then what I'm talking about is like the first 3 or 4 years. After that, it started to change. But we hired people on their energy level, on their ability, or what we thought to be their probability of actually doing the job successfully, in spite of the fact that they'd never done it before. So I think that was one of the ways that we were able to be successful. And then the other thing too was, we're a software as a service company, so we're a B2B SaaS company, and B2B SaaS companies live or die by lead generation and your ability to maximize the volume of leads and the whole conversion process. And what we did, now in the SaaS industry, it's clear that content and content marketing is a key way to do that. 8 years ago, we started, because we had no money, our whole marketing was based on content. And back then that wasn't so obvious, but that turned out to be a game changer too, because we were able to create a significant flow of high volume leads at a very, very low cost. So, I think it was a combination of things.
And how you started in Barcelona, and today Barcelona has a reputation for being a hip, cool place to start companies. But when you did it, it wasn't well known, and it wasn't the current the thinking of the time was that doing a SaaS B2B startup in Europe, let alone in Spain, could never work. But you did. What did it pose specific challenges, or are we just overcomplicating what's required in the local ecosystem to sustain a company such as yours?
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is, as you said, when we started, the scenario is exactly what you painted. The picture is what you painted, but it was even worse because we were started coding in 2008. We went live in September of 2009. So on a global level, on a global basis, the world was imploding. In Spain, Portugal, and Italy, and these countries were like sort of the worst of the worst, right? So, I think in hindsight, thankfully, I didn't think about it too much because I probably wouldn't have jumped. I wouldn't have jumped out of the plane probably. But anyway, so what happens is there were advantages and disadvantages. The reason we started here, because I was already working here. At the time, I was CEO of digital media of Grupo Planeta, which is it's the largest media company in Spain. And we started, and I was funding the company, and I was, let's say, an active investor, right? But I still had the day job, right? And so what happened was, at that point, it was a disadvantage to be in Spain because of all the reasons you highlighted, but it was an advantage because the programmers were probably 25% of the cost of in a place like the Valley, less than half the cost of in London. So in every situation you've got pros and cons, but the fact is it's hard enough to start a business where you are, let alone where you aren't. So I was in Barcelona, so the logical thing was to start it here. The idea was to maintain the day job as long as I could, and for a sense of income. And then, there were disadvantages, but there were also advantages. For example, in our sector, Spain is a very, very large home for hotel organizations, right? So, if we had been in a different vertical or in a different segment, then maybe Spain would have been less logical. But there was a great opportunity to visit dozens and dozens of potential clients just within Spain and the Balearic Islands. So it's like everything. You've got pros and cons, and if you just focus and keep your head down and execute well, I think you can ultimately be successful from anywhere.
So how much sleep did you get when you were starting out?
That's a good question. And the answer is I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I don't have to sleep that much, right? And so what happened was, while I was at Planeta, I had a tremendous experience there, and he's since deceased, but the owner of the organization gave me an amazing opportunity, right? So I was very, very clear that the time that I was working, that when I was on my day job, that there was nothing going on with ReviewPro. So ReviewPro was at nights, it was on weekends. And so, like you said, that meant there was very, very little sleep. And at that point, being married and with small kids, there wasn't much spare time. But, there are the things that you do when you feel like what you're doing is not a job, it's a vocation, and it's what you've been waiting for your whole life. So somehow, you just, or at least in our case, head down, focus, and thankfully not a physical need for a lot of sleep. So,
so how did you do the work-life balance? And that's a critical part of that, because to ultimately be personally successful, your company has to be successful, and you need to have still the people that love you, care about you and not feel like they've been, cast asunder by your new work mistress.
Yeah. Well, you're supposing that I balanced it well, and I'm not so sure that was the case.
Okay.
I think that, well, first of all, during that period, I had work, I had ReviewPro. Well, I had work during the day. I had ReviewPro, and the little time I had, it was only with my family. I mean, I didn't have any, all my hobbies and all my personal interests in that sort of were completely parked. But I think it wasn't easy. Also, Spain is very different than growing up in the U.S., where maybe you're a young family and you're living in one city, and the in-laws or all the support structure of family are spread across the world, right, or spread across the U.S. And in this case, my ex-wife's family was all in Barcelona, and there was a great family infrastructure. So, the truth was a lot of the time when I probably should have been there, I wasn't. But the family suffered less because they were in an infrastructure that probably, if we'd been in the U.S., wouldn't have existed, and would have created a much more complicated situation. So,
so you now speak quite a bit about SaaS and the like. And what is your advice for aspiring entrepreneurs that want to create an online SaaS business, B2B today? Is this possible? Were you just in the right place at the right time, and this ship has sailed, and people, aspiring entrepreneurs, should consider other businesses to start? What's your advice?
Well, I think that B2B SaaS businesses are very, very attractive in the sense that if you can get clients, it's a subscription business. If you've got a good product and you can maintain and or keep a low churn or a high renewal rate, they're phenomenal businesses, right? Because you have high fixed costs, but you have very low variable costs. So once you plow through profitability, you become, as you grow, the sort of hockey stick on EBITDA and profitability. So I love SaaS business models. I would encourage, and I love B2B. So yeah, I think there's still a lot of stuff to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that what we did of building a company with so little money, I think it's much more difficult now than it was when we started, because there's much more competition in all sorts of verticals, right? Because of the overall attractiveness of B2B businesses. So I would say, hey, if you can find a niche and you have an opportunity, then yeah, go for it. But the probability of needing lots of capital, or more capital than we had, is very high. So maybe there's a lot of opportunity for success in different verticals, but maybe the opportunity for doing it in the way that we did is maybe less likely than it was previously. I mean, the other thing too is the thing that's interesting that I've seen over time is B2B businesses. Oftentimes you start with a product, and there's a lot of competition, and there's a need to keep evolving and complementing your original product with other products. And so I think that it's not all about having a good idea and just getting to market, but you have to be with a very clear vision of where your vertical is going over time, and being able to anticipate what new modules, what new complementary add-ons you can be developing. Because I think today it's very difficult to come up with one product and, I don't know, 5 or 7 years later, sell a successful company with still that one same product, right?
Yeah. Were you the initial sales guy also? Were you the one that, found the initial clients? How did that work?
Yeah. So basically, when we founded the company, there were 3 founders. I had 60% of the company, and 2 others. Tim had 20% and Dimitri had 20%, right? And these 2 individuals, they had worked for me in a project that I'd had in Planeta. So we knew each other, and our skill sets were very, very different. Tim has a very, very strong product background. Dimitri has a very strong technical background, and my background is more in, let's say, business and sales and marketing, business development. So you ask about advice. That's another thing, is be very, very careful who you pick as partners, right? Because oftentimes what I see is people pick their friends or individuals that have the same skill set, and that doesn't usually work out very well. So I think we were lucky that the 3 of us complemented each other. And so to answer your question, yeah, I was a person that was more focused on sales and marketing and business development. And that was a lot of what kind of on the work lifestyle balance, what created friction or challenges, because I was literally traveling around the world. I was traveling like 70% of the time, because we didn't have enough money to open offices all around the world. So we would do marketing, we'd do lead gen, and then we would just like deploy, sort of go to the opportunity and be there. And if that meant getting on a plane to go to Bangkok tomorrow, then we did it, or I did it. So but my focus was more on the sales, marketing, and business development.
And how much did your initial contact with customers and their initial familiarization with your original concept, how much did that change once you started getting their feedback on how they were using it, or how they weren't using it, or what they actually needed? I mean,
that's a great question. So one of the things that was interesting is neither of the 3 of us had ever worked a day in a hotel, right? So we didn't come with the arrogance and hubris of thinking that we knew the market better than our clients did, right? So what we we're good at was identifying an opportunity. We're good at building quality technology, great analytics, and we were really good at listening to the market. And so one of the things that we did and that allowed us to, we evolved our original product is still the backbone of what we do, but now, that was the online reputation. But then along the way, another way to gather guest feedback is in-stay and post-stay surveys. So we developed a module for that. And then clients had more and more challenges actually executing on the operational and service improvements. So we built a case management tool. And then they wanted to communicate more with guests while they're on property. So we built a messaging hub. So now we have this suite of products, but we're still very, very true to our original mission, which was to help guests or help hotels deliver better guest experiences. And by doing so, generate higher online rankings and better revenue. So, we've evolved. We never, let's say, pivoted. We evolved, and that evolution came from having a core group of very active, engaged, and very knowledgeable clients that were giving us ideas about how to evolve the product or products. And I think ultimately our success on a product level was we were great at executing, but even more so, we did a phenomenal job of knowing which clients to engage with, getting the ideas from them, and then curating the ideas of product suggestions from 10 or 12 really active clients. Because, you remember the old Henry Ford saying, I think it was, if he'd asked people what they'd wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse, right?
Yeah.
And so what we did was we asked what they wanted, and we didn't exactly give them that, but we curated their ideas based on feedback from a number of different, very knowledgeable clients. And so I think that was our success to evolve, as you asked about, over the years and keep relevant and keep ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm. Well, you recently sold ReviewPro very favorably to a division of Alibaba. How did you know that it was the right time to sell?
Yeah, so we're, as you said, we sold a year and a half ago to an amazing company called Shiji. And so Shiji is a multi-billion-dollar, in fact, it's the largest hospitality technology company in the world. Most people outside of China, even in the hospitality industry, have never heard of, because they're very big in point of sale and property management systems, right? So, and they're, as you said, they're 20% owned or so by Alibaba, right? So we didn't start with the idea of selling the company, but rather in 2016, we saw the opportunity to develop these new products and amplify additional products. And so we realized to do that, it was going to make sense to raise more money to accelerate that process, right? And so we started in April of 2016 a process to raise $5 million to help us fund the expansion of these new products, right? And so what happened in that process, Shiji and two other financial investors came into the mix. And then what we found was, and what we ultimately, the reason we sold, and especially why we sold to Shiji, was they're in the industry, right? They have a long-term bet on hospitality technology. And for me, that was, and well, for us, the founders, we liked that they were all in. They valued our data, and we were a really logical and obvious complement to their really, really cool global strategy for the next 10 to 15 years. So it turned out to be a great economic exit for all of our investors. They left with between 2.5 and 28 times their money. So our original investors got a phenomenal return. Shiji invested 7 million euros into the balance sheet. So we'd grown the whole business and got up to about $10 million in revenue and profitability on the 5 million I mentioned before. So now all of a sudden we had 7 million to really grow it. And we had a partner that was willing to give me, going back to this control and the ability to really manage the company, a shareholder agreement that was very, very favorable. They gave me tremendous autonomy to run the business, or us as a management team to run the business. So, it made all the sense in the world, for our clients, for our employees, for our investors, and it turned out to be a phenomenal outcome for everybody.
Yeah. It's similar to how and why I sold iSupply when I did, to what was the largest, market intelligence firm, and again, such a complementary fit. It really made sense for everybody, and everybody on the team could ultimately get a lot more responsibility being part of that organization than I knew I would be able to fund them to do that. So
Yeah, you can be a part of something bigger and leverage economies of scale and critical mass. So yeah, I think we found ourselves in that situation. And then in a year and a half after the sale, the Shiji as an investor has been unbelievable, right? They don't meddle in the business. When we need help, they're there to support us. So it's, I think a lot of times, your outcome at iSupply and at ReviewPro, that was because we were fortunate enough to sell to great investors and great partners. Mm-hmm. And so that's not always the case, right? But so.
Yeah, well, you need to do your due diligence on that, just like you need to do your due diligence on anyone that you bring into the business. Because if they're critical partners and you have a different vision of the future, then the whole business suffers. Well, RJ, we've reached the end of another episode of From the Ground Up, and I really would like to thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show, and would like to also thank a few other people, the Microfame Media team that helped me produce this series. I really appreciate their help, and most importantly of all, ultimately the people that are starting to create a great audience for the show From the Ground Up. I want to thank them for listening, and we'll be talking again next week right here on From the Ground Up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek.